So I appreciate Rob asking us in. I'm Robert Johnson. This is my dad, Jerry Johnson. We're a member of the Atlanta Woodcarvers group. We've both been past presidents of the club. I'm also involved as the president of the Peach State Turning Club. I'm the president and founder of the Atlanta Penn chapter of the IAP.
So when we need a new president, we could come over and contact you?
You know, I have welcomed in and dismissed the administration in my club as the same person on more than one occasion. And they keep telling me if I can find someone as dumb as I am to take the post, that it's a lifetime position. So I'm not looking for any other lifetime positions. We do a lot of carving. Dad and I do a lot of in the rounds carving. We don't do a lot of chip carving. If you're looking for a resource for chip carving, I would recommend Mickey Hudspeth. I don't know of anybody alive who has that type of patience or skill as a chip carver. Dad and I got started back in 1998. We went to the Gwinnett Woodworking Show. It was in the Gwinnett Center there, and I had been doing scroll sawing for quite a while, and Dad had just retired or was getting ready to retire, and he wasn't interested so much in the scroll saw, but we wanted to do something together that we could learn and do. So we went there. We met a very nice gentleman. His name was Jerry Edwards. He's passed on probably about 5 years ago, but what a wonderful individual. There was no secrets with Jerry. He was always very kind with his time, and if you had a question, it was an open book. So it was a good time to spend with Jerry. We miss him a lot, but he's the one that really got us started. As I said, we're a member of the Atlanta Woodcarvers group. They meet on the second Tuesday of every month. Dad's got some sheets up here if you're looking for contact information. We're going to do this pretty informal. Dad and I do this presentation at Woodcraft for their beginning carving class. So we'll skip through some of the slides. We'll include some of the slides, but really we want this to be an interactive class. So just shout out your questions. Don't hesitate to throw up your hand or whatever if you have a question or whatever. We're going to have some complete pieces up here that we'll leave up here. So after the presentation, you're welcome to come up and take a look at them. We're going to pass around a bunch of stuff. If it can just end up in that box back there, that would be awesome. We may pass around some things that are very sharp. If you want to see how sharp they are, I recommend you use the arm of your neighbor, not yourself. I'm sure they'll be happy to assist you in finding out how sharp the knives are. Outside of that, again, we'd like this to be interactive, so please just shout out your questions, and we'll start from there. You want to introduce yourself, or?
Well, a lot of you I've already met. I'm Jerry Johnson. You've probably seen me at the wood shows, and some of you have been to our meetings at the club, so you probably have seen me before. But our bio is pretty much out there. We do teach a class at Woodcraft for beginning carving, and I recommend to everybody, if you're interested in carving, join a club that carves, because like our club, every month there's something to learn, and the cost is minimal. You pay for a membership, and what is a membership now? $15 a year or something. It's piddling amount.
I think they charge us $30, but that's a PIA factor.
Yeah.
The most normal people, it's $15.
For normal people, yeah.
Where do you meet?
I've got the address and stuff on the handout here. I ran out of ink, so I only printed 10 of them, so if you'll share among yourself. It's at the Mac Love Center in Decatur, is where we normally meet.
Is that Shallowford? Or what road is that?
In the corner of North Druid Hills and
Cheshire Bridge?
Cheshire Bridge. No,
No,
not Cheshire Bridge.
is it Shallowford? Yeah, I don't think it's Cheshire Bridge.
Claremont.
Claremont, that's
North
it.
Road and Claremont.
I knew it was down there somewhere. So you got the presented by, here's some of the topics that we'll cover. Types of carving, your basic tool set. Of course, we'll talk about safety. Dad will do a really good job of telling you how to keep your tools sharp. We'll give you some resources to go to after you leave here today if you're getting serious about it. And of course, we'll take any questions at the end, but again, just shout out your questions as they happen there. So we'll have some additional topics if we can get to them. We'll talk about wood types, your basic cuts, practical carving, the small wizard for beginners, and if time permits, the snowman pin or the ornament. We'll talk about those. Those were projects that we actually do in the beginning class. You actually carve a face in our beginning class. When you tell a student that their first project's going to be a face, they normally tend to freak out a little bit because the human face is one of the hardest things to capture in a carving. But by the end of the session, they're amazed at how well they're able to at least make the basic cuts to get a rendition of a face going. So types of carving. You've got relief carving, you've got pierced, and you've got architectural. Dad and I do a little bit of the relief. We do some pierced work, and we don't really do a lot of architectural. Do we have any period furniture maker club members here? Al Breed was in a month and a half, maybe 2 months ago, maybe now, maybe 2.5 months ago. He does a lot of architectural carving, ball and claw feet. We're not ball and claw feet kind of guys. As you can see, we're kind of more of a casual type. I don't think there's a market for pig's feet on a table, but if there is, we're your guy. But the normal sense of it is usually a ball and claw foot. So as you can see, you've got a chain up there. Most of that's considered a whittling type thing, but you can also consider that an end around. This is a member of our work from the club. It's a steamboat. It's a low relief, which means that the cuts aren't really deep. It's just kind of relieved just slightly. It's not a real deep relief. We don't do a whole lot of that, but we do some of it. So you have the whittling there. You have in the round, and you have the chip carving. We don't do chip carving.
Here's some in the rounds.
So when I talked to Rob on the phone and I said, Rob, let me help customize this for your group. What are the kinds of things that you're wanting to do? And he said, well, there's a lot of beginners. And I said, great, we can definitely do a lot of that. And he said, basically what kind of woods, cuts, safety, finishes, and those types of things. So as we go through here, I'm going to talk about, hopefully, and cover most of what Rob wanted in the presentation. And this is a good section here to talk about the typical woods that wood carvers like to use. Tupelo, we use a lot of Tupelo. Most of the duck guys use Tupelo. So if you see a duck decoy or some type of duck carving, normally you have that as a Tupelo type.
Tupelo is normally used by a lot of the guys that do power carving because it doesn't fuzz like the basswood does.
Tupelo you can get online from several different places. It's got a little bit harder to find than it was about 3 or 4 years ago, but if you find the right guy, he's got a basement or garages full of it because the economy has slowed down so much. There's a guy out of Louisiana and there's a guy out of North Carolina. If you do a search for Tupelo, you'll find both of them and you can get plenty of it from there. It's a little bit denser than basswood. It's like Dad said, it's really good to use for your power tools if you're going to use like a Fordham and some of your burrs. It's not as soft and pull up as much as a basswood blank.
Kind of like side.
It's actually blocked up in the water there.
It is not like cypress. It's not quite that soft. And if you're talking about true cypress, the true cypress will be a lot harder than the Tupelo will be. I've used a lot of that in flat work, and you know it's a lot different than using the Tupelo.
You want to pass this different?
Yeah. So I'm going to pass around some of this. Spanish cedar is also a good wood to use. It's nice and soft. The grain's pretty tight. What Dad's got in his hand now is that's cottonwood bark. We enjoy working with cottonwood bark. I've got a few finished pieces. Here's a. Dad doesn't like so much the cottonwood bark. I don't get why he doesn't like the cottonwood bark stuff. I like it. It is Spanish cedar. That is what we call a closet buddies blank. If you notice, there's a hole drilled in one of the corners. We take a loop of leather and put it in there and tie that, and it goes in a closet. What we do is we take and carve usually a scowling, like Norwegian face in it, and it's supposed to scare away the moths. So that's a great wood to work with. The cottonwood bark is an excellent format to work with. You can do a lot of different things with the cottonwood. I thought I had a house in here, but I don't see it anymore.
It's right here.
There was a completed one, I thought. Here it is. I'll pass that around. And then the other piece that's going around is basswood. You'll notice that it's very light. It's very stable wood after you get it dried. It's got a very indistinguishable grain on it, and it's got a nice tight grain. It takes details very well. You can power carve on it. It fuzzes up just a little bit. Knives, gouges, and all kinds of things that the basswood works very well. That's the preferred wood of the carvers. It just, you know, it's inexpensive again. If you get good basswood, it comes from up north where it's colder climates, and you get better wood. If you're looking to get basswood in any kind of size that you can think of, there's a guy in Wisconsin and another guy in Michigan. If you Google basswood, both of those guys will come up, and you can order however big or small sizes that you want. It's real reasonable. It's not very expensive. Whoever's got that basswood block, shout out if there's a price on that. It's like a couple, $2.20. So I mean, you know, for that size block, you can, you know, get $2.20, and you know, you can get multiple pieces out of there. Another wood that's frequently used but is not readily available anymore is Jelutong. For a while there, we could get Jelutong everywhere. Now you really have to look for it to find it. It behaves and acts like basswood, and it's really good for power carving again. The only thing that Jelutong doesn't do real well is take outdoorsy kind of climates well. You don't want to use Jelutong for an outdoor project.
It still, Jelutong too also has a high silica content. Yourself sharpening your tools a lot.
Do you have an example of that?
No, I didn't bring any Jelutong with me because I don't like it.
And it doesn't like you.
So I'm sorry I didn't bring any of it. I got rid of as much of it as I could when I had a chance. So those are, you know, basically what you're going to use. Our British cousins like to call it lime or linden. Again, a common people separated by a common language. So we call it one thing, they call it another. The Jelutong actually is in the oleander family. Red bay is also something that we use, back to the cedarish kind of. The red bay is almost like a red cedar. It has that same color. It's just a little bit more dense than a red cedar or a juniper would be. And it's good to work with too. We do a lot of spoon carving with red bay. Cedar's always good, and butternut is always good. I didn't bring any butternut, but I did bring some walnut. Okay, Dad's got some, here's some walnut. Butternut and walnut are basically the same thing. Most of the wood is probably about the same consistency. You know, in the architectural world, we also have, I didn't bring any mahogany, but mahogany's excellent wood to carve. Most of the architectural pieces you'll find the high dollar woods are used, so the mahogany is something else that can be used to carve with. Back to Dad's point on the mahogany, you'll find some of the mahogany has a high silica content in it as well, and you'll end up sharpening very frequently when you use some of the mahoganies as well. But the butternut and the walnut are pretty much on that same type of hardness scale. Both of them take detail pretty well. Butternut's getting harder and harder to find. So if you find a good consistent supply of butternut, I recommend you kind of build up a supply of it if you find it. I don't have any sassafras bark with me because neither one of us like carving sassafras bark, but you do have the cottonwood bark and it's extremely similar. The sassafras bark again has a high silica content, as does the bark that we've passed around. A lot of people like to have a separate tool set to use for the bark because they don't like using the same tools that they use to work on other pieces as they do the bark. I don't find that that's true because I'm going to sharpen my tools no matter what I do, but some people actually have a separate set of tools that they use to carve the bark with. Yes, sir?
For the harder stuff, do you typically grind this up at a different angle, like on chisels and stuff?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll cover that when we get to the sharpening part, but yes, the hardest wood that we really carve in is probably the butternut, and then I have this hand mirror down here. I don't remember what wood it is, but I'll get rid of as much of that as possible later on as well.
Isn't sassafras toxic?
Not that I know of. You know, if you're allergic to it, I'm sure it could probably give you a problem.
I know if you drink too much of the tea, you can build up a toxic reaction from if you drink a lot of the tea.
All right, so we'll talk about some styles of carving. One of the saving graces as a carver is the word stylized. We use the word stylized when we capture the essence of a piece. You look at it and most people go, hey, it's a fish. Occasionally you get the guy that thinks it's something else. And you're like, okay, that's great. But stylized is a saving grace for somebody who doesn't want to put a lot of detail into a piece, and again, just capture the essence of the piece. We fall back on that when we find that a piece doesn't really work the way we want it to. We go, oh, it's just a stylized piece, and everybody goes, oh, okay. So, you know, stylized, you're not going to find a lot of high details in it. And again, it's just kind of the rough essence of the piece. It's not necessarily scale to scale. The lifelike, you'll notice over here on the left, a beautiful bird. In this case, you're actually working to scale. You're capturing all of the details for something. You know, you're working in something that, you know, you're trying to capture everything to make sure that it looks like a raccoon or a bird. The caricature, we do a lot of that. We do a lot of work that is considered caricature because it's an exaggeration of a real piece. The scale is not to scale. You're trying to exaggerate something, so it could be a nose, an eye set, a set of ears, could be, you know, girth. But you're exaggerating things. You're not actually taking the human dimensions and making them scaled. Then there's formal carving. Again, I have some balusters and things at the house that are formalized carvings, and most of those are like on your furniture. They're your Newport shells, those types of things. I don't do a lot of those yet, but I'm starting to get into it with the period furniture group, and that's another whole thing. You have the whittling and the folk. I had a set of chains here. This is your traditional, let's keep old men busy on the porch work normally. This is kind of busy work where you sit out on the porch and drink some sweet tea and just kind of noodle out how you're going to do something. It's an informal kind of, art. It's not something that, a piece you're going to pick up and, find at the High Museum or something. This is, yeah, absolutely. This is a little bit, the bracelet or the Mobius interlocking strips there, that's a little highbrow for whittling, but it's the same concept. You lay something out and then you carve it. And again, it's very informal and comes from just people passing down. So you have grandfather sitting on the steps and the grandson watching him carve, and then years later the grandson will pick it up and then remember what the grandfather carved. It's just an informal type of work. All right, so I'm going to get Dad here to talk about the basic tool set. Again, this is, if you're looking to get into woodworking, it's probably, and I hate saying this, the cheapest way to get into working with wood. The basic tool set doesn't cost you a whole lot. You can buy some blanks. I wouldn't recommend finding a fish in a 15-foot 2x4. That's a lot of work, but if you're looking for the soul of a 15-foot piece of board and it is actually that little fish in there, then knock yourself out. A 2x4 runs about $4 or $5, so I think you saw that for $2 you can get some real good basswood and start some. The one thing I didn't mention was the bark. The bark tends to get a little bit of expense on if the bigger pieces, but the smaller pieces you can get fairly reasonable. Usually you pay it by the pound if you buy it in a large lot, and sometimes it can run from $8 to $12 a pound depending on who you get it from. All right, I'm gonna unclip this and give it to Dad so he can talk about the basic tools. All right. Don't say booger.
Booger. The basic tool set here is on the board, and you can get into the business for about 30 or 40 bucks. We like to say that, but it's like any other discipline you get into. Once you get deep enough into it, you're going to spend a lot more. To get started with carving, you need a glove to protect your hand. That's the hand that you're not holding the knife with. You need a thumb guard here on the board. You use that because sometimes you're going to cut toward your thumb. I use this to protect my palm. That's not a necessary item. You're going to need a knife. This is a Murphy knife. That's generally considered to be a starter kind of knife. I recommend that if you start carving, go to a club, talk to the people there, say, can I use your knife? Try them all out, and then decide which fits your hand. Some people, when they buy the Murphy knife, they say the handle's too small. They'll go to something like the Flex Cut, the bigger handle. This is the kind of handle I like best, but I've recently found some better custom-made knives that I've bought a few of, and I like them a lot
You have
too.
an opinion on Mora?
On who?
Mora, M-O-R-A? They're mostly conventional knives, but they do make some carving.
I've not tried them,
Please
so.
be careful with this. It is very sharp.
And then what you'll see here is a strop. That's a different kind of strop than you see normally. I prefer the longer strops. I also use a power strop, which consists of a 1-inch sander in a 30 or 46-inch length. And you buy a leather belt for it from Klingspor, and then you can power strop. Takes a while to strop with this, but the power strop, you zip with your knife when you're done, and I'll show you stropping and all that stuff when we get into the sharpening pieces. But basically, this is a little diamond card. You're going to have some way to sharpen as well as strop. That's one of the things that you can get, and it's real handy to carry. But I recommend these for mobile sharpening. They're diamond pieces. They have a diamond surface on them, and they come in several grades. This one happens to be a coarse grade, and I'll pass that around for you to look at. But they come in several grades, and you can use them. They're reasonably portable. So those are the basic tools. Once you get into tools, it'll change. You can buy sets of gouges. Now these particular tools can be used by hand or with a mallet. But I recommend that when you get started with a few knives and palm type tools. And here's a couple of those we'll pass around. Be careful. Some of these are very, very sharp. One of the rules is we never put meat in front of a sharp edge. And I want to tell you that as we pass this stuff around, because you never ever put an edge of a carving tool to skin. They're surgical sharp. The guy knows what he's doing. I'm going to pass out 2 tools, and I want you to keep these together. Now, one of the ways you can tell whether a tool is sharp is cut wood. But if you're doing like I do, and you're at your machine and you're sharpening stuff, the part of the human body that's closest to wood is nails. So you take your knife and you set it on your nail. No weight, no pressure, and drag it. Okay, if it doesn't snag, it's not sharp. Most people would regard this long knife as sharp. The short knife is sharp. When I set it down, it doesn't want to move. It's digging in, just the weight of the knife. So that's your test for sharpness for a carving knife. Now,
Again, make sure you do that on your neighbor. They'll be happy.
never touch the knife to flesh. You'll see guys who do demos and they'll shave their arm. That's showboating, and that knife, that's not really sharp. Anybody can cut hair. You can cut hair with dull stuff, but to really do a good job with wood, you've got to have a sharp knife, and the softer the wood, the sharper it's got to be, because this is wood. Wood's just a bundle of straws glued together. And if you have a dull knife, what's going to happen is that. If you have a sharp knife, you'll cut down on the straws and it'll go right through them. So that's the manual tools. Now there's a lot of ways to power carve. Okay. This is a Fordham, and you have a handpiece that goes on this end. Of course it plugs in and it rotates, and you got bits all the way from hairy to fine. You can also do this with a smaller version called a Dremel, which most of you are familiar with. But take this and pass it around, and that's one of the hairy bits. That's for hogging. As far as power goes, I didn't bring a Dremel, but with a Dremel you use the smaller bits. Stuff like this. And then there's the most important tool of all. The pencil. Because if you're a carver, you draw stuff on there, you carve it off, you draw some more. Most important carving tool in your bag, pencil. So that's a kind of an overview of all the different types of tools. But to get started, that's what you need right here. And then you can decide whether you like it or not. You're out $40 in a blank of wood. Bit of time. Now I hear a lot of things about people about carving. They say, I don't have time, I don't have patience. And a lot of the ladies are afraid to get into the business. Our carving club has more women right now than men. They've discovered that that's not necessarily a problem for women. In fact, they do some really good stuff. The time thing, if you watch any television at all, it's half commercials. I got an apron that sits in front of me, got a pouch in the front, an easy chair. I carved during commercials. Wasted time? No, I can use it. When it comes to patience, I don't have any of that. So I carve, and when I get frustrated, I set it down, go do something else. So.
I pretty much wore out the patience thing. I do have to take credit for that.
All right, that's an overview of the tools. Now there's so many different kinds of knives. The ones I passed around before are straight knives. Here's one of the custom knives. It's a curved knife made by a fella in Tennessee. I've gotten a couple of those and I like them a whole lot. They come in all lengths and all sizes. You'll find that if you get a long blade on a carving knife, that you have a lot of opportunity to screw up your carving and maybe cut yourself in the process. So that length there and the shorter one that I passed out earlier are about the best ones to start with. Murphy knife is ideal, but don't buy the long version of it. The logical steps are this set, then palm set. Now if you decide you're going to do architectural or work on heavier stuff, you can go to something like these. If you want a power carve, that gets a little expensive. You're going to start there, start with a Dremel, and then move up to, decide if you like it first, and then move up to the more expensive stuff. Join a club, use their tools, then you can decide.
Gary, what's the price range of that roll-up set there?
This roll-up set?
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Oh,
The reason I say that is these tools originally belonged to a Mr. Fry.
okay.
That name sound familiar to anybody here? So he was an preeminent carver here in town, and when he passed on, his wife brought some of his tools to the carving club, and they auctioned them off. So I bought it for pennies on the dollar.
Typically, the long gouges, I bought a couple of pieces that Al had talked about. Those can go anywhere from $18 for one gouge on up to about 40-something for a gouge, depending on how wide and how much steel's in there. So if you're talking about a set of 20, it could get up there into $400, $500 range pretty quickly. When Dad and I talk to folks about purchasing the tools, a lot of woodworkers go out and they buy sets of stuff to start with. And, we're okay with buying the sets if the price is right, but you're only going to use a certain amount of those tools in a set. And what we recommend doing is just going through and playing with a set and finding out what you're going to use and what you like, because it's all good. There's only one other that I have found discipline of woodworking that's as personalized as wood carving, and that's wood turning. If you go to somebody else's shop who's a wood turner and you pick up their tools, you're like, oh my God, how did he figure out how to put that grind on a tool? And it's the same thing with the carving. You're going to find that if you pick up a knife of somebody else, you're going to go, what are they thinking here? And it just works for them. For some reason, that's just the way they want to do it. So both the wood turning and the wood carving, you're going to find people modifying tools, creating their own tools, and selling and marketing those. So you're going to just find that people tend to use a particular tool more than the other. You know, we've got folks who, if they have to make a cut, they use a V-gouge. I don't use a V-gouge, I just use my regular knife, but to them that's they're powering away with a V-gouge and I'm there with a knife. It's just that they like using a V-gouge and I like using a knife. That's all the difference there is to it. All right, let's...
On the Fordham power tool, is reverse mode a needed item on that?
Only if you're going to sand with it. What that does is it throws it away from you and back into the dust collector. You can use it as an option. Some people are left-handers. They may actually like it in reverse. I don't know. I like to stay out of the left-handed thing. They're kind of weird.
They don't work right.
They don't work right. My mentor, most of you know, is Don Russell. And he's a lefty, so it's kind of fun working with some of his stuff sometimes. Oh, we're back over here now, okay. So we talked about our basic tool set. Let me get back over here where my icon is. All right, so we got an advanced tool set, and as Dad had talked about earlier, we've got a set of palm chisels. We've got a leather strop now to be able to sharpen some of our profile gouges. We've got some of our long gouges. We're talking about maybe a wood burner now as well, so you can do some texturing. I have to appreciate the people who do birds and ducks. Those guys burn about 1.5 million little tiny itty bitty lines to get those feathers right. And I stood and watched a guy do that for about 2.5 hours.
Pass that away.
And I don't know, but I just can't sit there for 2.5 hours doing one thing like that. It's just, but when they're done, it's absolutely gorgeous. But that's something else that you want to do. You know, some of the frou-frou stuff you can get.
There's a picture of the apron right there that I've got.
That's the frou-frou stuff I'm talking about. I don't own one of those, by the way. You got 3 or 4, don't you?
That's because your wife won't let you carve in the living room.
So there's the wood burning equipment. So let's talk about some safety real quick. Always secure your work. For some of this work, you're going to see people with the pieces in their hand, and that's quite all right. If you're working with your long gouges or power tools, you're going to want to have your work secured to the table. This is a piece of hold down that most guys used to put in their hallway to hold rugs down so you're not stepping on the rug and sliding down the hall. We usually put this down on a work surface, and then for something like this where you're doing a low relief, you put that down there and it grips. It's kind of like a router pad. So now I want both hands on the tool to control this. So now I'm not the 3-arm carver where I'm trying to hold something down and then all of a sudden I've got some meat in front of something that's going to cause some issues. So always secure your work. There's all kinds of, there's actually called a jerry rig where you can screw your piece down. It's on a ball. You can, rotate it and do all kinds of things. You can use bench dogs. We have a tray that we normally make that's got a piece of wood that sticks up. We slide that in there and then we clamp that down and then we can work on it. We use all kinds of methods, but it's always important to make sure that when you're carving, you know what's going to go on with that piece of wood while you're carving it. That's always an important factor. Okay, move the work to avoid danger. If you like sharpening, you keep your wood in the same angle of your vise and bench, and as you tap into it, it comes out and exits and hits those metal parts. and you'll end up sharpening a lot. So if you enjoy sharpening, don't move your piece or figure out a better way to cut on it. You'll enjoy sharpening a lot. But it's always important to move that piece. I mean, standing or sitting and carving safely, can be a tiring process, especially if you're using the long gouges. So make sure you're moving that piece. We're turning things constantly to try to find a better angle or to safely cut something or not cut the nose off of something. It's always better to keep that piece moving and give yourself a better avenue to make that cut. Always keep your tools sharp and clean. You've always heard that a dull knife is going to cause you more problems than a sharp knife ever will, and that's because the pressure it takes to carve with a dull knife is a lot more than it usually is for a sharp knife. And when you carve, you want to be in control of the blade. When you see people carving like this, you want to be about 8 or 9 chairs away from them, because they're not in control of that knife. They have no idea where that thing's going. You want to see somebody who's got it stabilized and carving, using the muscles of their fingers to make sure that they're cutting. This uncontrolled type cut is definitely not what you want to do.
I'm going to show you just a second here. This is how you do a controlled cut. You anchor everything, okay? My thumb is anchoring my other hand. I will make a stop cut, and then I can cut toward myself because I'm protected, okay? I've got my guard on. I prefer not to cut toward myself, but sometimes you have to. So you make a stop cut, you relieve it. If you go to the end and you make a cut and you're not cutting into something, notice the thumbs and how I anchor everything. Also notice this motion, okay? Anchored, the motion of the knife.
So his overcut will only go as far as his thumb will let him. He's not out here somewhere with a knife stabbing his neighbor in the whatever regions. It's very controlled. You're not relieving all that stress coming out of the wood by nice and controlled cuts.
If you look at that piece of wood, there's a little bit of shine to where the cut is. That tells you got a sharp knife. Okay.
The other thing is when you're doing flat work and you have the gouges and the chisels, you always want to have both hands on the chisel. And that reason is for the same type of thing. You're in control of the tool. You're not running off and pushing, uncontrollably in one direction or the other. You're only cutting as far as this finger will allow you when you're pushing that gouge. It's not going to slip all the way through the piece. You're just using this thumb and your finger as a guide to control that cut.
Avoid this kind of motion too. People
Yeah,
do that.
that samurai thing, not a good idea.
I watched the guy at the show do that one time. Oh my God.
Part of the questions that we get asked on some of this is, keeping your tools sharp and clean. We use a lot of our tools, so we hone and do a lot of polishing and stuff. We're not really into making our knives look good. We actually use them. So there are some people that will polish them and make them look brand factory new. We're not into that kind of thing. We actually use them. But they're a lot prettier than turning tools when you put an edge on them. So just keeping them clean. If you've passed around the knife that had the little alligator on the top, that's to keep it from banging around in your toolbox and getting, other metal pieces to dull it out. We do some other things to keep our tools. Dad's got a good bit of Flexa hose that he puts on the top of his to keep them from banging around. All right, so keep fingers and both hands behind the blade. I think we've pretty much hammered that home. No meat in front of the blade. Always wear your protective gear. Most of the accidents that we see at our club, somebody will go off and buy a Coke or go to the restroom, and they'll come back and they'll absent-mindedly just pick up their work and start cutting again. And they don't put their equipment back on because they're just not there. You know, you just come back and you're like, okay, let me grab all this stuff, and you forget to put your glove and your thumb guard. The next thing you know, the second most important piece of equipment you're using in your toolbox is a Band-Aid or super glue or your car to get to the emergency room. I can let you know that we've had some experience with some pretty awful cuts. We had somebody stab themselves in the hand pretty good. That emergency room trip took them about $1,800, and then there was quite a bit of therapy after that. So a $9 glove and a $1.50 leather piece looks mighty darn efficient in dollars and cents.
How tough are those gloves? You cut it all?
They come in different styles and types. This is the least expensive. It's woven Kevlar, and it won't protect you against a stab wound, but it will protect you against a slicing wound. And they're not 100% effective. They do make another type of glove that has woven stainless and Kevlar, and there's several versions of them out. Those are much more expensive than this version. They're more protective, but they're also harder to hold a piece with. So I prefer this particular type of glove. Anybody else can try the gloves out and decide which one they like.
I've got a couple gloves. I was up doing some work at a place, and they had a whole box of them. I talked about two of them, and they're Kevlar. I don't know if you can poke into them, but they're just,
What color are they? White?
they're white.
Yeah, that's a little bit more of an industrial glove than this one is. Normally, like a chicken processing plant or somebody that's using fillet knives will have a lot of those around to keep the workers from getting, again, cut on that slashing cut. If you take a fillet knife and stab your hand with that glove on, you're still going to go through the woven parts and stab.
I know I tried slicing it, it won't do anything.
It won't do that. Well, it'll dull your knife, but
Yeah.
One word of warning with this particular kind of glove and most of the other ones, if you're doing work with power carving and you're using a rotary type tool, don't wear this glove. Wear a leather glove. Reason being is when that spinning item with little sharp ends on it hits this stuff, it unravels it and it will hurt you.
it'll bind up and pull your hand in, much like a lathe will do, like with a paper with a towel or something. It's a no power carving with those on.
That's what I've heard. Now.
Yeah, well,
I've never experienced that.
and scissors won't help cut it out either. Just saying. We're not much into the power carving per se, but again, if you're going to do power carving, you have glasses that you're looking at as being a very good investment. If you get a wood chip in there, that's probably the worst thing that you can get into your eye. If you get metal in your eye, they just take you in and hook this huge magnet up and they put it near your eye and they yank the metal piece back out of the eye. If that sounds like fun, go ahead. Not really for me. That's why safety glasses at all times. And as woodworkers, you know that dust is our enemy. If your lungs are your first dust extractor in your workshop, you're probably not thinking too clearly. Power carving is definitely something that you want to be able to have a dust extractor or some other method of that dust getting away from you. There's several units that you can buy that are just regular little 50 millimeter fans that have a filter that pull all that in there, and you can carve in like a little hutch looking thing. If the worst case, go to your local hardware store, get you a 20-inch box fan, get you a 20 by 20 filter, tape it to the front of it, and suck the air away from you, and all that stuff will go right into the fan. Okay, and they work pretty good. Part of the romance of carving is that it's a nice quiet, you can take it someplace and just kind of do it in a park bench somewhere. The power carving clubs, they tend to have, more dust, more noise. It's not quite that romance with the wood, but, they do things a lot faster than us. All right, so keep the brain engaged. I know that's really difficult for a lot of us. Try not to have any distractions, and I love telling this story because if she was here, she'd laugh along with me. We had a lady in our club, we named her Crash. She had cats, and the cats would walk around while she carved. Well, she had some stuff in her lap with a leather thing she was carving. One of the cats jumped up onto the arm of the chair she was carving and then jumped off. Well, all of the stuff in her lap started going to the floor. Obviously, she tried to catch it, caught a few in the arm and in the feet, trying to make sure the cats were okay. You know, try not to have any distractions going on while you're carving. And that includes if you're on some kind of medication that kind of makes you a little funny or woozy. Insert joke here, go ahead. But always, you know, it doesn't take a second when you're turning or with a power tool to really hurt yourself. You know, most people look at this and it's a knife, but you can really, you know, cut tendons and other important things that are underneath the skin. So always try to stay focused on what you're doing, and try not, again, you know, down in a 6-pack of Bud and then grabbing the carving knife probably isn't the greatest idea. I know Grandpa probably didn't look at it that way, but it's probably not the smartest thing to do. Never catch a falling tool. I don't know about you guys, but I get home, get home and want to relax, and if I'm carving, I may only have socks on or bare feet. Not really a great idea if a knife goes in. It's actually going to yard jar into your foot and stick out. I mean, these tools are so sharp that if you drop them from just a couple inches, they're going to stick. Let it go. It may hit the floor. You may have to resharpen it. It might put a dent in the wood handle. It's better than going into a vein or into an arm or a foot. Trust me. A lot cheaper too. Never carve tired or influenced by chemicals, legal or otherwise.
Caffeine? You avoid caffeine?
No, I don't actually, but you know, if
Surgeons do.
I'm
really not doing fine enough work, I guess, to make that much.
Something like that pen that's going around, yeah. But if you're covered in stuff up here, it's not.
I save that for when I'm chainsaw carving. All right, so here's some safety items we've talked about. So gloves. About the only one we really hadn't talked about is maybe some of this roll tape that we use on our fingers. It's kind of got like a fiberglass or type Kevlar thing. You can wrap them around your fingers. You know, I hate to say this, but wood carvers are just as cheap as wood turners are. We'll try to get the tape off, you know, and then use it again, and then take it off and use it again. Most people just tape it and then throw it out, but, you know, we're cheap. So, but those are acceptable, you know, safety devices. If you don't want to use, or you find that the leather thing doesn't work for you, you can always tape up your fingers and use that. There's the little portable dust extractor. That runs about 149 bucks, something like that. You can suck the air through there and filter it all out. And again, back to the box fan, 15 bucks for the box fan. You can get quite a few filters for they're hardly anything at all. And then a good roll of duct tape, I mean.
They just got some square channel of Moe's where that filter would slide right down in it.
It's a little fancier than I was thinking, but
Off and then put that on. It's full every time I use it.
there you go. So those are where you're at. A case, we've got Band-Aids and first aid kits. You know, all joking aside, you know, any blood thinners or concerns like that, you make sure that, you know, you're letting somebody know where you are in your workshop when you're coming back, so, you know, they can file a missing persons report if you're not back on time. They make quite a few good things for folks who have that type of problem to stop the bleeding. But if that's what you need, then that's what you're going to do. All right, so sharpening for wood carvers. Dad's going to put on this portion of things. Before I do that, I was just informed that the carving part of this has been expanded out in the area out here row 2 or 3, they got some new carving stuff, so you can probably find a lot of what we're using, maybe not quite the exact same thing, but you might find some similar stuff outside. All right. You notice I'm not the sharp guy, right? I have to hand that over to somebody else.
Well equipped for it.
Yeah.
All right, sharpening is a fun subject, but it's not a fun thing to do. That's why you'll see on most of my tools I protect them. Not just to protect the tool, but to protect me as well. And when I work on a workbench, I'll have the pointy stuff pointed away. But this keeps the tool sharp. And it's you buy a couple feet of this at was it Lowe's or the Orange Place, you know, you can get many knives protected with it. The sharpening piece is comes in many flavors. Just as the tools come in many flavors. And I showed you before the diamond piece that used to sharpen with. One of them we passed around. Here's another one. This one's a little bit finer. In fact, this is the super fine version of it. And this is great for sharpening straight blades. The one thing that I found that sharpens this kind of curvy stuff, gouges. You can also use it on turning tools, and gouges. For gouges, the jewel tool works really well. For flat blades, it's awful. But for this kind of tool, with any kind of curve on it whatsoever, it's wonderful. Also, if you have a sander, it's good, but the concern there is building heat. So be careful. Always keep a cup of water handy, or at least a large chunk of metal that you can lay the tool blade down on to wick the heat away. Because if you blew one of these blades, it'll never be good again, good and sharp, because you can't keep it sharp. The first cut will dull it. So don't blue your tools. For carving tools, they're a lot different than what you will see in most other disciplines. We talked to, somebody asked about the angle. Yeah, there's a big difference. Most of the stuff that you use to work on hard type woods, not hardwoods per se, but hard type woods, things like oak, you're going to use a 35-degree angle on the majority of your tools. For carving softwoods, you want somewhere around 20 to 22 degrees, and that's the big difference in carving tools. If you're carving architectural stuff in hardwoods, you're going to need a different angle on your blades than you're going to use for carving stuff like basswood, cedar, and that sort of thing. So keeping that angle and keeping it sharp is what you really need to have fun when you're carving. And carving with a dull blade is not only not fun, but it's dangerous, as you can possibly imagine. And sharpening can be done in so many different ways. It's hard to tell you what you want to do. Again, my take on the thing is try somebody else's stuff before you buy it. Before you go out and spend $300, $400, $700 on a sharpening machine, try it out somewhere. Decide if it's worthwhile for you to spend that kind of money. Or do you want to go spend $35, get something like that you can carry with you? Okay? The strop is going to be somewhere between $10 and $15 depending upon whether you buy it at a store or have somebody make it for you, or in this case, one of the club members made a bunch of them for the members. So, you know, and the angle is the thing.
Jerry, when you make a strop like that, what do you make it of?
Just leather. And you want, you don't want a real fine surface on the leather. You glue the fine surface down. And the reason for that is you will dress this with compound. a polishing compound. The green or the gold stuff, either one of them works. They say people will tell you the different colors work better for different things. What you want something is pretty aggressive. You don't want a fine polish. You want something aggressive enough to remove metal.
Something like Triple E or?
Oh, no, that's, Triple E has got too much liquid in it, and that can affect the leather. You want compound that's mainly wax and kind of a harder wax. They make a green stuff. You get, with some of the kits, you get the gold stuff. Any of the stores carry that for different stuff. Now, any knife that you buy is not sharp. They will say they're sharp, but they're not. Any knife that you buy off the shelf will require sharpening. And the angle is the most important thing. When you use either the diamond or the strop, I'm going to do this on an angle, but normally you would lay this flat on a surface. Okay, you establish your angle. That 20-degree angle is important, and then you drag it along. Don't need to put a lot of pressure on it, just a sort of a medium sort of pressure. Pull it along, pull it back, pull it along, pull it back. Now, that takes a lot of time. If you have a 1-inch sander and you put a leather belt on it, you take that sander, buy one of the 30-inch jobs, get the belt from Klingspor, you take the sander and it normally sits here like this, you turn it up like this, clamp it in your vise, and then the belt is running in the correct direction. Instead of running down, it's running in the right way. So you can then have the belt, if you slip, it goes away from you. So most of these sanders run down. The surface runs down. You clamp them in the vise so they run away from you. And then all you do is you hold your knife, and you're done. Okay? It's much quicker. I've got 2 of them in my shop. I got one set up with sanding strips. I got one set up with a leather strip. For my gouges, I got a dual tool in the corner, and I'm done. I'm carving again. So, and by the way, that dual tool works really good on gouges for turning as well. You don't take nearly the metal off. I'm not here to sell that thing. It's expensive, and if I had it to do over again, I probably wouldn't have bought it because it's too expensive. Once again, the angle is the thing. If you have to take a knife that you've bought and change the angle on it, or take it down because it's a thick blade. Thin blades work best on the fine wood, the softer woods. You need to take down some metal. You can use a grinder. You can use to spend a lot of time using a diamond set, or you can use sandpaper on a sander. Prefer the linear type sanders because on a circular type sander you don't affect the blade the same way along the length of it if you've got a circular type. So I prefer the linear type 1-inch sanders. Now,
You talking about a belt sander?
belt sander, yeah. One of the standing belt sanders. There's a difference between a lot of the different tool compositions. The steel's different. You have to worry, it's not high-speed steel in carving tools. High-speed steel is made so that you can take it to a grinder, grind it, and you don't worry about bluing it. It's just, it's high-speed steel. It's good. It's all good. When it comes to carving tools, it's high carbon steel. And it has to be that way because the blade has to be finer. When you talk about a turning tool, High-speed steel, you won't get as fine an edge on it as you will with carbon steel, and it won't be as flexible. Some of these blades, these thin ones, have a lot of flex to them. They'll bend, and you need some of that when you're carving because you'll want to be getting into small places. Big difference. Big difference in angles, big difference in the types of steel. We talked about how to sharpen. If you have any questions about sharpening, I'm open for that right now.
You mentioned earlier the knives, or you mentioned the term surgical steel. Is that the high carbon steel?
Our tools are high carbon steel. They're surgically sharp, but they're not surgical steel. Most surgical steel has a stainless element.
Your blades have a notch on by the end of the blade where it goes into the handle. Is that to keep you from going too far, or is that like your starting point?
A notch?
Yeah, the few that you send around right at the end of the, not the tip, the opposite end where it goes into the handle, the blade itself.
Right in the base of the blade. Typically, that's just the blade is built like that. When they make the blade, they're only going to sharpen it up to that point.
Oh, you're talking about the blade itself. I'm thinking the handle. No, that's just the way it's made.
Yeah, because I saw it on there, was one with like a reddish handle like when it was made, and you put that same notch on there, and I was just wondering if that was...
Nah, that's just the way it comes out.
They'll actually start with the billet of that steel, and then they'll start to sharpen that down, and that's just the section that they sharpen. They don't go all the way back.
Okay.
That's all.
Any questions on sharpening? All right, let's rock on.
Just thinking.
I think we've beat that to death.
I think we've covered that. We covered that. Covered the 2035. We covered this, I believe. Covered this.
If for those of you who turn, if you decide to turn softwoods, you need to really get your turning tool sharp. And, you know, you can use a diamond hone for that. The softer the woods, the sharper your tool needs to be for turning. And I discovered that when I turned some blanks for the carving club. I turned 20 or 30 blanks for them. It was a round item that they want to carve on the top of, and you got to be sharp.
You never want to test sharpness with flesh unless it's your neighbor. You're usually okay with it. Crosscut wood or material to be carved. When you really want to test to see how sharp a blade is, go across the top of the grain and find out how sharp your tool is. That's the cut that you really have to have a sharp tool for in order to make it a successful cut. Again, the straw thing.
Just to demonstrate that, you know, the straws, if you cut down on the straws, you know, you're going to get a good cut. That's a good way to test a knife because that's the hardest, most resistance you'll get from a piece of wood. If you have a soft piece of wood, and a lot of the harder, more brittle woods, if you cut up on the grain, it's exactly what you see. It'll split, and then you'll have an uneven cut.
So, you know, sharpening is like finishing. Everybody has their favorite way of doing it, and if you ask 10 different people, there's probably about 11 answers on how they want to finish a product. You know, you got oil stones, water stones, sandpaper, diamond, jewel tool, work sharp. I mean, you got all kinds of ways to sharpen. And if you find a way, you know, and it's successful, and that's working for you, continue to use it. All right, you want to talk about the sharpening sequence here?
Okay, if you got a blade and you need to grind it again, be careful, carbon steel, don't glue it. Hit it, cool it, hit it, cool it. If you're going to do it manually, start out with 300 to 400 grit, or you can use an oil stone. I've got one that I've used for years. It's two-sided. It starts out about 400 grit and then goes higher to 1,000. After that, you can strop to a mirror finish with manually or with a leather belt. Grind, sharpen, and strop. Okay, we talked a little bit about stropping, but you know the important part about the stropping is you dress it with your compound, and then you know if my hand is the blade, establish your angle. You know, people like to work away from them, but you can pull it this way because when you pull it, your blade is pointed in a different direction, so you're not being dangerous. You establish your angle, pull it with a medium pressure, and then hit it. The rule is for every 20 minutes of carving, you need to strop, you know, whatever to get it back, the blade back, and then you can test it either on your wood or on your thumbnail.
How about rolling the edge to make sure?
Okay, why do we strop? Well, if you use a diamond thing or any other kind of abrasive item on a blade, what happens to the blade is the edge tends to roll over. Okay, so if I'm the blade here and I'm pulling it like this on a diamond stone, the upper edge is going to have a hook, and we strop to get rid of that hook. It's a burr or a hook. For turners, you call it a burr, and you want that on some of your things like your scrapers. But it's not a good thing for a carving tool because you want to penetrate the wood with the least resistance that you can get. Now, turners, a lot of them will hit the grinder and go right to the wood, and that's good if you got a hard wood. What's going to happen is you hit your wood and it's going to pull that burr off. But with carving tools, it's a different story. You really need a strop.
One of the things that beginners find a real hard concept to understand when they're stropping is they'll pull the blade across the strop and then they'll change the angle right at the end. So for an example, we'll use this as the strop and we'll use my hand as the blade. They're pulling the blade across, keeping a great angle, and then at the last second they're changing the angle. All that does is rolls the edge back to dull it out. So a lot of folks who think they're sharpening are doing themselves a disservice. The thing you want to do is you want to keep that angle and then lift it off of the strop. You don't want to pull it across the strop and then change the angle at the last second. All you're doing is taking that nice, sweet, sharp edge right back off of the tool again. So you want to take that across there and then lift it up instead of changing the angle at the last second. Ergonomically, that's not how your body works. You have to control that action because your body's just wanting to use that whole wrist action thing to roll that thing over because it's just more comfortable for your body.
Now, did everybody get a chance on one of those knives that I passed around to tell the difference between the sharp one and the dull one? How much difference was there? To a carver, it's huge. That dull knife would be sharp for a turner. So there's a big difference in the disciplines.
Here's another tip. You want to sand after you carve. Again, you get to that high silica content where you're pushing the silica from the abrasives into the wood. Then you're taking your nice sharp knife and you're actually cutting, and that silica is dulling your blade. So you want to get to a point where you think you're done carving and then start doing your sanding. A little trimming here and there, getting a little fuzzy out of the corner, no big deal. But you don't want to sand something and then go back to carving it, and then sand something, and then go back to carving it, that silica will really dull your blade. Let's see where we're at. We're doing okay on time?
How much you got?
I don't know, you tell me.
Officially, it's not 30, but.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right, so I think that's all we have now. We're going to just share some practical experience with you. So if you want to leave, go ahead. We'll be here to answer all the questions and stuff. But we'll keep going. And if you want to stay, you're welcome to stay. And if you want to leave, you're welcome to leave. I want to talk a little bit about resources for carvers. You know, there's a lot of good books to get started with techniques and projects. There's a good place up in the mountains, Smoky Mountain Wood Carvers. They've got a really good store and stuff up there. You can order online, call on them. There's two good American magazines for carving, and you can get a lot of good patterns and stuff out of there. There's good distributors, all kinds of stuff in here for the American carver. There's a British carving magazine, and I'm going to explain the difference in just a second. There's two different British magazines. They're a little bit more expensive. The difference between the American magazine and the British magazine: the American magazine would like for you to pick something up and actually carve it, and they give you patterns and they show you how to use it. The English one will show you what the guy's stuff looks like, and then they'll dare you to try to do it. They won't give you much information on how to do it. So there's, again, this little informational thing. The British magazines don't do a whole lot of patterns and things that are going to help you out. But what it will do is give you a very good idea of people who've been carving for a long time and their styles and some things that you can absorb as an artist. And then the American part is really instructional. They want you to actually complete the project. The British guys don't want you to carve something that looks like theirs. They're just kind of putting it in your face and saying, I can do this.
One more resource I've got here. I've got 10 copies of this. It's a list of clubs in the area and resources on the web and local resources that carry carving stuff, and a lot of these have supported some of the clubs in the past. I only have 10 copies, and I'm sorry that I don't have more, but my printer ran out of ink when I tried to print this stuff. So, yeah, if you need to, run it through a copier, but there's 10 of them here, and you're welcome to them.
So Rob had asked a few questions when I was putting some stuff together for the demo. And one of the things that I wanted to cover is how we go about getting our blanks, or how do we do that? So there's a couple of different ways. This magazine has this angel pattern in it. And what I do is, Don Russell has a lot of cutoffs in his shop that he just throws away that are this thin material that he uses for other stuff. Well, what I do is I make a photocopy of that and I spray glue it onto there, and then I scroll saw this out. And then I trace that onto a blank, and then I band saw, if I can't scroll saw it, into my blank. So that's one way to do it, is you make a template, and I put what it is, what page I got it out of, what book. If it's a magazine, I'll put the month and the edition on there. Some of these smaller blanks you can put on a scroll saw. About 2 inches is probably real close to the maximum that you're going to want to do on a scroll saw without mashing your fingers up pretty good. Another way to get blanks is to go to someone who does rough outs. And this is a cute little pig rough out. And what this rough out is this person has placed this in a vise, and they have a duplicator, and it kind of just hogs out most of the wood to get you close to what this little cute pig's supposed to look like. So then you can spend $8 on this blank and have most of the wood that you don't want on the blank hogged off. So this is another way to get rapidly started on something. Somebody says, oh, I need a pig for a birthday. I mean, I don't want to go research books and find a pattern and then go and trace it all out. I just order it online, carve the pig, and give it away as a gift. Another way to get your blanks is, this is a resin cast of one of the artists up in Tennessee. He has a little ornament that hangs. You can get the resin cast, and then you can take your blank and carve it similarly if you're talented enough. Epic fail on this one, but it's reasonably close, I guess. Another way is in between both of those, and that is you can get the kits, and this is the ubiquitous Homer. Everybody who earns their chops in the carving world does the boot, and then they do the Homer thing. And this is Homer, and he comes already cut out. Now this you could do on a scroll saw very easily, and then just take the instructions and then carve the rest of Homer out. So those are really the most frequent ways that we go about creating stuff. Another way, here's a spoon. We just took a blank and we photocopied it and stuck it directly on the blank and then started carving it. That's another method. The one that we're currently using, Dad has it on his hand mirror as well. He's much further along. Is we take the photocopy of the pattern that we want. We take and put some carbon paper underneath here.
Graphite paper.
Graphite, sorry, no carbon paper. Bad, no carbon paper.
Carbon paper has a lot of oil in it, and you can't get it off if you have an uncarved area. It soaks into the wood, and it's awful.
Doesn't like the oil. So we put that graphite paper underneath there and we trace the pattern out. You can see I'm kind of keeping to make sure that I don't cut away pieces that I need later on. That's a bad thing. I can't super glue those back in there. And this is another way with which we, get our patterns or what we're working with. All right, so, Dad and I are up here and we've got finished
I'd like to
pieces.
demonstrate some cuts first.
All right, and if you want, Dad's going to demonstrate some basic cuts. Come on up here and take a look at it. If you have any questions or want to see anything, just let us know.
Okay,
Here for you guys.
Paint you use finishes.
Good question, the finishes. We use a product called Wax and Feed.
feed and wax.
Feed
Feed and wax.
Feed and wax. It's like a clear thing, so if you see something that doesn't have a finish on it, it's probably that. These paints are just acrylic paints. You can thin them out or make them as thick as you want. You can leave as much of the wood there or as transparent as you want. And then most of these pieces have lacquer on top of them.
You can also use, for a lot of the subtle things like the blush of cheeks and that, you can take oil paints and thin them down real thin, because a lot of these softer woods will suck up the color.
That's how this is done. The wash, the cheeks and things that you see here, the highlights on the face, that is a very small piece of paint inside a very large jar of turpentine. And you just keep washing that over until you get that look that you want. The same thing, this acrylic paint is used on the beard and around the edge. But all of the highlighting of the face is done with that oil paint, and then there's lacquer shot over the top of it. And those are typically the finishes that we use.
Anybody group or a small number of people carving birds and ducks, decoys?
We do have people who do birds, but specifically not decoys. Who's the guy out in Conyers that does the decoys? Good old what's his name?
Yeah, what's his name? Never forget him.
If you Google him, you'll find him immediately.
Google what's his name.
Google what's his name. Dick Chenoweth. He does birds out in Conyers, Covington area. There is another member of one of the carving groups that disbanded. They just lost the group that, there was no longer any interest. He must do ducks, all day long, every day, burning, the whole 9 yards. And he gets a pretty good bit of money for his decoys.
There's a guy in Flint River that does it.
Yeah. But, in our club specifically, we have bird carvers, but no real duck following.
Yeah, there's some guys in Flint River carvers, and they're listed here, and the contact information is here. There's some guys down there that do some birds.
There's lots of magazines and lots of books on duck carving. If you're interested in that type of stuff, we have a library in our group that has a lot of the duck books and magazines and things in it. If you're interested in that, we'll be happy to, get you something to get started.
You ever carve a golf ball?
No.
I have one fellow carve for me that wrecks over in Athens, yeah.
Just be real careful which golf balls you carve, because some of those, as you cut them open, explode. So be real careful which
You
ones
must be
you
on the right
choose.
one on this.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want the solid core foamish looking stuff. Sometimes the golf balls the older ones have all of the bands, the rubber bands still in them. And then there's a few that actually have compressed gas or something in them, and when you cut them open, so be real careful. Softballs, the foam core softballs, the guys are carving those now. In the old days, again, softballs were just a bunch of wound strings and stuff, but they've gone to the same format that the golf balls have. So your old, family softball has the outer skin like a baseball, and then inside it's got that foam core. They just cut half of the face off, pull the skin out, and then you have that nice ball half to cut.
People will carve on anything. I'm
They're
telling
like
you.
turners. They'll try anything they want.
I've seen people carve on baseball bats, walking sticks, some of the hardest woods you can imagine, but carvers will try anything. I don't go for the harder woods. I just can't expend that kind of energy on it. I'd like to show you just for a minute, these little figures right here. These are called 5-minute wood spirits. Okay. Okay.
5 minutes.
And some of them you can do in 5 minutes, but some of the detail you can't. And we talk about how easy it is to get into the carving business. It's relatively cheap, and you don't have to know a lot to get started. Now, I'm going to demonstrate for you, if you can catch this, how some of the cuts are made. The basic cuts that you see executed on those little items there are a stop cut, okay, a push cut,
Chip carving.
well, and if you do it again, okay, and you get like that and like that, we're starting to form a nose.
Wait, hold on. I'll find it. Okay.
Okay? So, I mean, that's relatively small. You do this in several steps to make one that size. But you can see the cuts are not real complex. A stop cut, and then cut back to it, that's a pull cut. Okay? The stop cut's not deep enough. And then there you've started to shape your wood. Now, the stop cut, the push cut, and the pull cut, they're the simple ones you start with. You can do other ones if you take and make a straight cut like so, and then take another one on the other side like so. You will see that you take out a chip of wood and you've formed part of what you're going to do for the beard.
I've sent around what we call a study stick. And on the study stick, you go through that step process that Dad's going through to shape the nose, the eyes, and everything. By the time you get to step, 20-something on there, you pretty much cut the nose 24 times. So you start to get better and better at it. But as you go around the study stick, you can see the progress that he's talking about for that same 15-minute wizard thing. There's a bunch of different steps that I sent out on that individual little square, half square, but that study stick there really shows you how you get that process of going through there and then getting the face out of there.
And all of the things, all of the cuts that we made on those can be done with that knife. It's just that simple. All right, where do we go from here?
We are done, sir. Any questions? You guys can come up and look at the
Is
finished
that the
work.
class you teach then, is to do what
Yes.
you're just demonstrating, is that the face that Jack?
That is correct. And then if we get a chance to, if everybody gets through that, then we go to a little snowman hanger ornament. If the class, gets through the 15-minute wizard thing, which takes about an hour and 20 minutes. I appreciate